Charlemagne, the 100 Years' War, the French Revolution, Napoleon. When you think of French history, these are probably the greatest hits that come to mind. They're the epic stories of kings, conquests, and guillotines that fill our textbooks. We see the storming of the Bastille, Napoleon on his horse, the Eiffel Tower scraping the sky. It's a powerful story, a dramatic one, but it's not the whole story. What if the timeline that truly forged modern France lies in the chapters that were torn out of the history books? What if, just beneath the surface of famous rulers and revolutions, there's a secret history of slave revolts that financed an empire, silent coups that rerouted government, and forgotten protests that defined the very soul of the nation? This is that hidden timeline. Our story begins not with the bloody spectacle of the Bastille, but a month earlier, in a much less dramatic spot, an indoor tennis court. On June 20th, 1789, the representatives of the Third Estate, basically everyone who wasn't clergy or nobility, showed up to their meeting hall to find the doors locked. It was a classic power move by King Louis XVI, meant to put his subjects back in their place. But on this day, something snapped. Instead of going home, they regrouped in the only building they could find, a nearby tennis court. And there, all 576 of them took a collective oath. It was an astonishing act of defiance, a vow not to give up until they had written a new constitution. This event, the tennis court oath, is often treated like a simple footnote before the real revolution begins. But that completely misses the point. This was the moment the monarchy's psychological power shattered. For centuries, the idea was that power flowed from God to the king. But in that stuffy, unglamorous room, the Third Estate declared that sovereignty came from the people. This was a revolutionary idea that transferred the whole concept of the nation from the king's body into the hands of his subjects. It insisted that political authority didn't come from a divine right, but from the people themselves. Sure, the storming of the Bastille was a physical attack on a symbol of the monarchy, but the tennis court oath was a philosophical attack on the idea of absolute monarchy. It was the first real crack in a crown that had been worn for over 1,000 years, a crack that would soon splinter the whole thing apart. It was a promise that kick-started the revolution, leading directly to the end of feudalism and the creation of the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. While liberty, equality, fraternity was the rallying cry in Paris, a very different revolution was brewing thousands of miles away. It was happening in a place that generated a staggering amount of France's wealth, the colony of Saint-Domingue, what we now know as Haiti. In 1789, Saint-Domingue was the single most profitable colony in the world, responsible for 2/3 of France's overseas trade. All of this wealth was built on the backs of 500,000 enslaved Africans, who lived and died in some of the most horrific conditions imaginable. So when news of the Declaration of the Rights of Man arrived, saying that all citizens are equal, it lit a fuse. The enslaved people of Haiti looked at France's lofty ideals and demanded they apply to everyone. In August 1791, the largest and most successful slave revolt in human history exploded. Led by brilliant men like Toussaint Louverture, the Haitian revolutionaries fought their colonial masters, then battled the armies of Britain and Spain, all while navigating the political chaos in France. This wasn't just a revolt. It forced Paris to confront a terrifying question. Did liberty only apply to white people? The rebellion was so successful that in 1794, the French government made a radical choice to abolish slavery across its empire, partly to keep the colony from falling into British hands. It was a stunning victory, won not by philosophers in Paris, but by enslaved people fighting for their own freedom. But the story doesn't end there. When Napoleon took power, he hated the idea of an independent black-led nation. He sent a massive army to crush the revolution and bring back slavery. His army captured Louverture, but they were ultimately defeated. In 1804, Haiti declared its independence, becoming the world's first free black republic. The fallout for France was huge. Losing its wealthiest colony was a devastating economic blow. It killed Napoleon's dream of a grand American empire and directly led him to sell a massive chunk of North American territory to the United States, the Louisiana Purchase. The Haitian Revolution is a brutal and inspiring chapter of French history that exposes the deep hypocrisy at the heart of its own revolution. Back in Paris, the revolution had spiraled into its most infamous phase, the Reign of Terror. The guillotine, first used on a king, was now working overtime, executing anyone deemed an enemy of the revolution. The man at the center of it all was Maximilien Robespierre. But the hidden event that truly changed France's path wasn't the terror itself, but the silent coup that brought it to a screeching halt. By July 1794, Robespierre was the most powerful and feared man in France. His mission to create a republic of virtue had become a paranoid bloodbath. Members of the National Convention, the revolutionary government, were terrified. They knew a wrong word could get them sent to the executioner. The tipping point came on July 26th, when Robespierre gave a speech. He hinted at new conspiracies and more traitors in their midst. But he refused to name them. This was a fatal error. Suddenly, every man in the room had to wonder if he was next. A powerful instinct united all of Robespierre's enemies and former allies: self-preservation. The very next day, Thermidor on the revolutionary calendar, the trap was sprung. When Robespierre tried to speak, he was shouted down. The convention voted to arrest him. Less than 24 hours later, on July 28, 1794, Robespierre, the architect of the terror, was executed without a trial, meeting the same fate as thousands of his victims. This event, the Thermidorian reaction, was way more than just one man's fall. It was a counter-revolution from within. It marked the end of the revolution's most radical phase. The Jacobin clubs were shut down, and the push for radical equality was swapped for a return to conservative middle-class values. This shift created a massive power vacuum and a deep instability, leaving France desperate for order. And that desperation would eventually pave the way for a general named Napoleon Bonaparte. With Robespierre gone, France was run by a five-man committee called the Directory. This era is often painted as a corrupt but boring gap between the Terror and Napoleon. The hidden truth? This was when the government itself quietly strangled the democratic ideals of the revolution. The Directory was terrified of both royalists who wanted the king back and the radical Jacobins who wanted to revive the Terror. So, what was their solution? To cheat, repeatedly. This all came to a head in the 1797 elections, when, to the Directory's horror, royalist and conservative candidates won a huge majority. It looked like the monarchy was about to be legally and peacefully voted back into power. Faced with losing their jobs, 3 of the 5 directors decided democracy wasn't worth it. On September 4th, 1797, or 18 Fructidor, they staged a coup against their own government. With a little help from a general sent by Napoleon, they used the army to arrest dozens of their political opponents and just canceled the election results. Then they did it again. The next year, in 1798, the elections swung the other way with a surge of support for the radical left. And again, the Directory refused to accept it. In the coup of 22nd Floréal, they annulled the results and purged over 100 left-wing deputies. These weren't bloody overthrows, they were bureaucratic coups carried out by crossing names off a list. But the effect was devastating. They completely destroyed public faith in elections and the Constitution. They taught the French people that their votes didn't matter and that power just belonged to whoever was willing to bend the rules. The Directory had created a cynical, disillusioned nation, ripe for a strongman who could promise stability at any price. When Napoleon finally took power in 1799, we remember him for his epic battles, but his most lasting legacy wasn't built on the battlefields of Europe. It was built in the quiet offices of Parisian bureaucrats through a series of reforms Napoleon called his masses de granit, the masses of granite. Napoleon saw the France he inherited as just grains of sand, a chaotic mess after a decade of revolution. His goal was to build solid, unshakable institutions that would outlast him and give France a permanent structure. These weren't exciting decrees, but they became the bedrock of the modern French state. He created the Banque de France in 1800 to fix the nation's chaotic finances. He set up the system of préfets, government administrators for each region, all controlled from Paris. A system so effective, it's still largely in place today. He established the lycée school system to train future leaders, and the Legion of Honor to reward service and merit, not noble birth. And most important of all, he commissioned the Civil Code in 1804, later known as the Napoleonic Code. This massive legal project unified France's messy patchwork of regional laws for the first time, cementing principles like legal equality and property rights. While it did roll back some rights, especially for women, it was so influential that it was exported across Europe and the world. These masses of granite are the hidden architecture of modern France. While Napoleon the Emperor built a flashy temporary empire, Napoleon the First Consul built the state, its financial system, its government, its schools, and its laws. He provided the stability the Directory couldn't, and in doing so, locked in the central gains of the revolution. After Napoleon, the monarchy was restored, and the official story was that the whole revolutionary chapter was finally closed. But on our hidden timeline, the forces unleashed in 1789 don't just disappear. They pop up again in the 1830s, not in palaces, but in the gritty silk-weaving workshops of Lyon and on the barricades of Paris. The first tremor came from Lyon, the heart of France's silk industry. The silk workers, or canuts, were skilled artisans being crushed by early industrial capitalism. In 1831, facing falling wages and brutal conditions, they rose up. But this wasn't a random mob. It was one of history's first modern labor uprisings. They took control of the whole city before the army crushed the revolt. It sent a shockwave across France. This wasn't a fight about kings. It was a new kind of struggle, a class conflict that would define the next 100 years. Meanwhile, in Paris, the ghost of republicanism was still rattling its chains. The new monarchy of King Louis-Philippe felt like a betrayal. That anger exploded in June of 1832. The spark was the funeral of a popular general, which quickly spiraled into an anti-monarchist uprising led by students and workers. This is the June Rebellion, the one immortalized in Victor Hugo's Les Misérables. It was a heroic but doomed attempt to relight the revolutionary fire. The government crushed it, leaving hundreds dead. Though both revolts failed, they're critical stops on our hidden timeline. The Canute revolts proved that the Industrial Revolution was creating brand new, powerful conflicts. The June Rebellion showed that the fight between monarchy and republic was far from over. Together, they revealed that the ideals of 1789 weren't dead. They had just gone underground, ready to erupt again and again, continuing to shape France's fiery political soul. The history of France we think we know is like a grand stage play, starring a few famous actors in a few dramatic scenes. But as we've seen, the biggest changes often happened in the wings. They happened in a crowded tennis court, where the very idea of a nation was reinvented. They happened in a faraway colony, where enslaved people demanded the freedom their masters only preached. And they happened in quiet government halls, where silent coups killed democracy and bureaucratic reforms built a modern state. This hidden timeline doesn't erase the famous story of France. It makes it richer. It shows us that a nation isn't just forged by a few great men, but by a messy, contradictory collision of forces, of breathtaking ideals and ugly hypocrisy, of radical change and conservative backlash, of celebrated victories and overlooked struggles. This is the timeline that digs down to the true foundations of a nation, the secret history that really changed France forever. So, what other hidden histories do you think are still out there, waiting to be uncovered? Let us know in the comments. And if you want to keep exploring the stories that don't make it into the textbooks, make sure you like and subscribe.